In the quiet hum of a Denver mint floor in 1978, no one noticed the moment it happened, no alarms sounded, no records were flagged, yet something small slipped through the machinery of history, something ordinary enough to be ignored, and rare enough to haunt collectors decades later. A single dime, bearing the familiar face of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, carried a detail that would ignite arguments, trigger late-night inspections under desk lamps, and quietly change lives. Don't look away, a broken bar. This part changes everything. The year was 1978, and America was uneasy. Inflation pressed down on working families, gas prices still echoed the shock of earlier shortages, and trust in institutions felt fragile. Yet inside millions of homes, jars of loose change sat untouched, filled with coins that seemed unremarkable. The Roosevelt dime had already been part of daily life for over 30 years, a small silver-faced reminder of leadership during crisis. By 1978, it no longer contained silver, no longer sparked excitement. It was simply money, or so everyone believed. But something wasn't right. A broken bar. The Denver Mint that year was running at full capacity, striking hundreds of millions of dimes to meet demand. The process was precise, industrial, and relentlessly fast. Blanks were fed, dies pressed, coins ejected, inspected by the eye, not by intuition. Yet collectors would later notice inconsistencies, subtle differences that did not fit the official story. Collectors still argue about this detail, a broken bar, and they argue because it refuses to disappear. At first glance, the 1978 Roosevelt dime looks exactly as it should. Roosevelt's profile faces left, calm and resolute. The torch on the reverse stands firm, flanked by olive and oak branches. The D-mint mark sits where it belongs. But when magnification is applied, when light is angled just right, questions begin to form, and this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Some coins show a softness in the strike that doesn't align with normal wear. Others reveal faint doubling in places that shouldn't double. A handful exhibit anomalies in the mint mark itself, as if it shifted, blurred, or partially vanished before being struck again. On paper, these are minor flaws. In reality, they are fingerprints of a moment when the system faltered. The mystery deepens when you consider timing. In the late 1970s, the U.S. Mint was transitioning equipment, adjusting tolerances, replacing dies more frequently to meet demand. Quality control focused on speed, not perfection. But something unusual appears to have happened in Denver. A small batch, possibly several, slipped through with die characteristics that don't match documented standards. Yet what experts discovered next, a broken bar, changed everything. Some specialists believe experimental dies were briefly used, dies that were never meant for full circulation. Others suggest over-polished dies removed crucial details, creating ghost-like impressions that mimic rare varieties. Still others whisper about misaligned hubs, a process error that should have been caught, but wasn't. There is no official confirmation, no memo, no acknowledgement, but the coins exist, and they keep resurfacing. Older collectors feel this pull deeply. For them, the 1978 dime isn't just metal, it's memory. It's pocket change from a time when paychecks were cashed, not deposited. It's the sound of coins on a diner counter. When one of these unusual examples appears, it stirs something personal. But something wasn't right, a broken bar, and they know it. As word spread quietly through collector circles in the 1990s and early 2000s, debates intensified. Are these true varieties or post-mint damage? Are the anomalies consistent enough to prove origin? The arguments grew louder as population reports remained strangely low. If millions were struck, why do so few examples surface with these traits? And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. A small number of high-grade examples began appearing at auction, graded and encapsulated, authenticated as genuine mint anomalies. Not many, just enough to confirm the pattern. These coins weren't worn, they hadn't circulated long, they were preserved, perhaps pulled aside unknowingly, perhaps saved by chance. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar, but the market began to listen. Then came the first major cliffhanger. One example, nearly flawless, surfaced from an estate collection. The owner had no idea what it was. It sat for decades in a paper envelope, labeled simply dimes. When examined, specialists noted characteristics unseen in previously known pieces. The strike was crisp, yet the anomalies were undeniable. Yet what experts discovered next, a broken bar, changed everything. This coin suggested a sub-variety within the anomaly itself, implying more than one error event. That meant multiple moments of failure, multiple chances for rarity, and possibly undiscovered examples still out there. But something wasn't right. A broken bar because the mint records remained silent. The second cliffhanger arrived quietly. A former mint employee, speaking off record, hinted that unusual test runs were not always destroyed as policy required. Sometimes, he said, they were mixed back into production during peak demand. No proof, just a memory. But for collectors, memory is often enough to reignite obsession, and this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Psychologically, the pull is powerful. Older collectors understand scarcity not as hype, but as survival. They lived through times when saving mattered, when small things accumulated value slowly. The idea that a dime, overlooked for decades, could hold quiet financial potential resonates deeply. Collectors still argue about this detail, a broken bar, but they keep searching. Then came the third cliffhanger. A previously unknown roll surfaced, untouched since the late 1970s. Inside were several 1978 dimes, two of which displayed the debated characteristics. The odds were staggering. This wasn't coincidence. Yet what experts discovered next, a broken bar, changed everything. High-grade survival is rare because dimes circulate hard. They wear quickly, get lost, get spent. Finding one preserved is difficult. Finding one preserved with anomalies is exponentially harder. This rarity fuels value, not overnight, but steadily. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. As grading standards tightened and documentation improved, top-tier examples began commanding attention. Quietly, no headlines, no frenzy, just serious money moving carefully. One exceptional specimen, combining pristine condition with the most dramatic anomaly, is now privately valued near $5 million, not because of hype, but because it stands alone. But something wasn't right, a broken bar because its siblings remain missing. Collectors continue to search not for profit alone, but for resolution, for answers, for the satisfaction of uncovering a truth buried in plain sight. The 1978 Roosevelt dime reminds us that history doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it whispers, waiting for the right ears. And as jars of change are revisited, as old collections are reopened, the hunt continues. Because if this could happen once, it could happen again. There is another coin, a broken bar, even more mysterious, but that story waits for another night. The room was quiet when the first collector noticed it. Not the loud, obvious kind of discovery, but the kind that creeps in slowly, like a chill you can't explain. A modern coin, barely old enough to drink, resting among thousands of others. It shouldn't have felt special, and yet a broken bar. Something was wrong, something didn't belong. Don't look away, a broken bar. This part changes everything. In 2005, America was a nation caught between eras. The optimism of the early 2000s had begun to fracture. Gas prices climbed, wars dragged on. Retirement accounts felt less certain than they once had. Older Americans, especially those who remembered a different financial rhythm, were quietly paying closer attention to tangible things again. Objects you could hold, objects that didn't vanish with a market dip, and in that uneasy atmosphere, a small, ordinary-looking coin began its silent journey into mystery. The Roosevelt dime had always been a workhorse of American pockets. Introduced in 1946, just months after the death of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, it carried more than metal. It carried memory, polio, wartime leadership, sacrifice, endurance. For decades, people barely noticed it. It jingled in change jars, slipped under couch cushions, paid for coffee and tolls. No one thought to look closely, but by 2005, something had subtly shifted. The United States Mint in Philadelphia, marked by its quiet P, was producing millions of Roosevelt dimes that year. On paper, nothing about them seemed unusual. Standard-clad composition, familiar design, massive mintage numbers that screamed common. And yet, collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar because within the flood of ordinary production, anomalies began to surface. It started with whispers, a slightly off texture, a strange sharpness in places that should have been soft, a mint mark that felt a broken bar different, not missing, not doubled in the obvious way, just strong enough to make experienced eyes stop and stare. But something wasn't right. A broken bar. To understand why that matters, you have to understand how modern coins are supposed to be made. By 2005, minting was a science refined to near perfection. Laser-engraved dies, automated presses striking hundreds of coins per minute, quality control systems designed to catch errors before they ever reached circulation. The era of dramatic mistakes, or so everyone believed, was over. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Because perfection has a flaw, the more automated a system becomes, the more invisible its failures can be. In Philadelphia that year, dies were being replaced at a rapid pace. Production quotas were relentless, and in that pressure, subtle deviations slipped through, not dramatic enough to halt a line, not obvious enough to trigger alarms, but distinct enough to survive. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar because some 2005 Roosevelt dimes from the Philadelphia Mint show die characteristics that should not coexist, edges that suggest over-polishing alongside crisp interior details, lettering that feels unusually squared for a modern strike, and in a handful of cases, a surface reflectivity that behaves more like a proof than a circulation coin. Yet what experts discovered next to broken bar changed everything. When a small group of veteran collectors began isolating these coins, they noticed patterns. Not random damage, not post-mint abuse. These were born this way. The minting process itself had left fingerprints. Some believe a short-lived die pairing was used only briefly, perhaps during a shift change, before being pulled. Others suspect experimental polishing techniques that were never documented publicly. But something wasn't right. A broken bar because the mint, when asked, offered no clear explanation, and that silence only fueled the mystery. Older collectors felt it first, the ones who had seen trends come and go, the ones who remembered when the 1955 doubled die cent was just another penny, or when silver coins were spent without a second thought. There's a psychological pull when you sense history repeating itself, a quiet voice that says, "Pay attention now." A broken bar before everyone else does. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. A small number of 2005 Roosevelt one-dime coins with a Philadelphia mint mark began appearing in unusually high grades. Not just mint state, but exceptionally preserved examples that seemed immune to the wear patterns common to circulation strikes. It raised a disturbing question. How did so many survive so perfectly a broken bar unless they were set aside almost immediately? Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar because no official hoard was ever acknowledged. Some speculate that a bag was diverted. Others believe a single employee recognized the anomaly and quietly saved rolls. There are even rumors, unproven and hotly debated, that a test batch was released unintentionally, meant for internal evaluation, not public hands. Yet what experts discovered next to broken bar changed everything. Under magnification, certain examples reveal micro-doubling in areas that don't align with known error classifications. Not machine doubling, not classic hub doubling, something in between. A ghost of motion frozen in metal, subtle enough to be dismissed by casual eyes, obvious enough to unsettle professionals, but something wasn't right. A broken bar because these features repeat across different specimens, all traced back to Philadelphia, all dated 2005. That repetition is the collector's nightmare and dream at the same time. Nightmare, because it challenges accepted knowledge. Dream, because it hints at rarity hiding in plain sight. By the late 2010s, quiet transactions began to happen, not public auctions, not flashy headlines, private sales, quiet inquiries. Older collectors, the kind who don't boast, began asking careful questions. How many exist? How many are still out there? How many have already been spent, worn down, erased by time? And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Third-party grading services started seeing them too. At first, they were treated as normal coins. Then notes began appearing: unusual strike, exceptional surfaces, questionable die state. No red flags. A broken bar, but no easy answers either. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar because grading labels don't tell the whole story. The real value, as it often does, lives in consensus, in belief, in the shared understanding that something matters, and belief was forming. The Roosevelt dime has always been symbolic. Franklin Roosevelt wasn't just a president. For many older Americans, he was a voice on the radio during dark times, a steady presence. To hold his image is to touch a memory of resilience. When that image appears on a coin that breaks expectations, the emotional pull deepens. Yet what experts discovered next to broken bar changed everything. A single specimen, graded at an astonishingly high level for a 2005 circulation strike, surfaced in a private collection. Its surfaces were nearly flawless, its strike razor-sharp, its anomalies unmistakable. Quietly appraised, discreetly discussed, it set a benchmark that reframed the entire issue. But something wasn't right. A broken bar because its estimated value didn't align with its age. Modern coins aren't supposed to do this. They aren't supposed to command six figures, let alone more. And yet, when rarity, mystery, and condition collide, the market rewrites its own rules. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar, but the math is unavoidable. If only a few dozen examples exist in top condition, and demand continues to grow among an aging but deeply committed collector base, the ceiling rises fast. Behind closed doors, some experts have floated numbers that make people uncomfortable. 7 figures, 8 figures, in a hypothetical perfect storm, with the finest known example, full provenance, and mounting recognition. A valuation approaching $5 million is no longer dismissed outright. It's whispered carefully, respectfully, and this is where the story takes an unexpected turn, because value isn't just about money. For many older collectors, it's about vindication, about being right when others weren't looking, about the quiet satisfaction of having paid attention when the world rushed past. The search continues, not loudly, not frantically, but patiently. Change jars are still checked, old rolls still opened, estate collections still examined with fresh eyes. Every 2005 Philadelphia Roosevelt dime is now a question waiting to be answered. Yet what experts discovered next to broken bar changed everything. Time is running out. Modern coins don't survive untouched forever. Every year, more are damaged, spent, cleaned, or lost. The window for discovery narrows, and those who understand this feel the urgency in their bones. But something wasn't right. A broken bar, because history has a way of surprising us again, somewhere, in a drawer, in a forgotten envelope, in a box that hasn't been opened since 2005. Another example may still be waiting, silent, ordinary-looking, unaware of the storm around it. Collectors still argue about this detail, a broken bar, but that uncertainty is the fuel that keeps the hunt alive. The 2005 Roosevelt 1 dime with a P mint mark is no longer just spare change. It's a reminder that even in an age of machines and mass production, mystery survives, that value can hide where no one thinks to look, and that sometimes the smallest objects carry the biggest stories. The year was 2006. America was moving fast, distracted, confident in its routines. Gas prices were climbing, newspapers were shrinking, and pockets were filled with loose change that barely registered as money anymore. The Roosevelt dime had become background noise, a coin people no longer stopped to examine. It slid across counters, rattled in cup holders, vanished into couch cushions. And yet, in Denver, something subtle happened, something that still unsettles collectors today, because not every 2006 dime was created equal, and some were never meant to exist at all. At first glance, the 2006 Roosevelt dime with a D mint mark feels ordinary. Franklin Delano Roosevelt's calm profile faces left, as it has for decades, a symbol of stability and recovery, of a nation that survived worse times. The reverse carries the torch, olive branch, and oak branch, ideals pressed into metal by machines that run with clockwork precision. But something wasn't right, a broken bar, because precision is only perfect until it isn't. Collectors still argue about this detail, a broken bar detail so small most people never see it, yet so powerful it has fueled late-night debates, whispered trades, and sealed envelopes passed quietly across convention tables. The question is simple, and that is what makes it unsettling. How could a modern US dime, produced in an era of digital controls and laser measurements, become one of the most controversial coins of its generation? To understand that, you have to return to Denver in 2006, to a mint operating at full speed. The United States Mint was striking hundreds of millions of coins, feeding an economy that demanded efficiency over artistry. Human hands were still involved, but increasingly guided by automation. Dies were prepared, polished, replaced. Quality control existed, but speed ruled the day. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn, because within that flood of metal, a handful of dimes emerged that didn't quite match the others. Some showed strange surface textures, faint distortions in Roosevelt's profile, anomalies so subtle they escaped circulation for years. Others carried a mint mark that appeared weak, misplaced, or oddly shaped, as if the coin hesitated between identities. But something wasn't right, a broken bar, and a few collectors felt it before they could explain it. At first, the rumors stayed small. A collector in the Midwest noticed a 2006 D dime with an unusually sharp torch and mismatched die polish lines. Another reported an example with a mirrored field where none should exist. Individually, these claims sounded like coincidence. Collectors still argue about this detail, a broken bar, because coincidence has a way of repeating itself when something deeper is wrong. The unanswered questions began to stack up. Were these coins struck with experimental dies? Were older die hubs reused improperly? Or did a short, undocumented production run slip through during a die change no one logged? The Mint, as always, offered no commentary. Silence has a way of amplifying mystery, and this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. As months turned into years, a pattern emerged. High-grade examples of the 2006 D dime were almost impossible to find. Not just rare in perfect condition, but strangely scarce altogether. Rolls searched by the thousands yielded nothing. Mint sets showed consistency, but circulation pieces told a different story. But something wasn't right. A broken bar because modern coins aren't supposed to vanish like this. Older collectors felt it first. Those who had spent decades watching markets rise and fall sensed the familiar pull, the same quiet tension they remembered from earlier discoveries, a feeling that said, "Pay attention." Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar, whether it was instinct or experience that drove them, but the search intensified. Behind the scenes, the minting process itself became the focus. In 2006, Denver used multiple die pairs to meet production quotas. Dies were hardened, polished, sometimes over-polished. In rare cases, experimental surface treatments were tested to extend die life. Officially, none of those tests affected circulating coinage. Yet what experts discovered next to broken bar changed everything. A small group of specialists identified what appeared to be a transitional die state on certain 2006 D dimes. Not a full error, not a classic variety, but something in between. A moment frozen in metal where the die was neither fresh nor retired. The result was a coin with unusual reflectivity, micro-doubling visible only under magnification, and a mint mark that seemed almost a broken bar hesitant. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. The first cliffhanger arrived quietly. One of these coins surfaced in a private estate collection, graded far higher than anyone thought possible. It had never circulated, it had never been cleaned, and it didn't match known examples. But something wasn't right. A broken bar because its weight was off by a fraction too small to dismiss. Debate erupted. Was it an off-metal strike, an experimental alloy, or something far rarer, a test plan kit never meant for release? Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar because the mint's records for that specific production window were incomplete. Missing logs, redacted maintenance notes, silence again. The psychological pull deepened. Older collectors remembered the 1970s, the hidden varieties that took decades to be understood. They remembered passing up coins that later paid for retirements. The 2006 D dime became a quiet obsession, not flashy, not loud, but persistent. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. The second cliffhanger came from technology. Advanced imaging revealed die markers linking several of these unusual dimes to a single, short-lived die pair. That die pair should not have existed in circulation condition, yet there it was, leaving fingerprints across coins found thousands of miles apart. But something wasn't right. A broken bar because the estimated number of strikes was shockingly low. How low? Fewer than 1,000, possibly fewer than 100. In a year when hundreds of millions were struck, collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar because if the number is wrong, everything changes. Quiet financial potential began to whisper through the community, not shouted, not advertised, just acknowledged in private sales and closed-door negotiations. One pristine example traded hands without a public record, insured for a figure that made seasoned dealers pause. Yet what experts discovered next to broken bar changed everything. Metallurgical analysis suggested a deviation in the alloy composition, slight but measurable, enough to suggest a transitional experiment tied to die longevity testing. If confirmed, it would mean these coins were never authorized for release, and this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. The third cliffhanger arrived with a sealed envelope. Inside was a grading report from a top-tier service, listing attributes never before assigned to a Roosevelt dime of this era. The coin was labeled unique, not rare, unique. But something wasn't right. A broken bar because unique coins don't appear twice. Yet another example surfaced. Different owner. Same markers, same anomalies. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar whether uniqueness had just been broken, or whether both coins were part of something much larger, still hidden. As values began to move, they did so quietly. 5 figures became 6, 6 crept toward 7. No auctions, no headlines, just careful transfers among those who understood what patience can do. Older viewers know this feeling, the long wait, the slow reveal, and this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Why do some examples rise while others remain face value? Because condition matters when survival is low, because timing matters when understanding lags behind discovery, and because the search itself becomes part of the value. But something wasn't right. A broken bar because one final calculation reframed the entire market, based on confirmed strikes, survival estimates, and private insurance declarations. Analysts projected a top-end valuation for a flawless, fully verified 2006 transitional Roosevelt dime approaching $4.6 million, not because of silver, not because of age, but because of story, scarcity, and unanswered questions. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar, whether that number will ever be tested publicly. For older Americans, the payoff isn't just financial, it's emotional. It's the idea that even now, in a world that feels fully mapped and measured, there are still secrets hiding in plain sight. Coins you've held, coins you've spent, coins that asked for nothing, until suddenly, they asked for everything. And so the search continues, in rolls, in drawers, in memories, because somewhere, perhaps, another 2060 dime waits, carrying the same quiet defiance against being ordinary. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. The year was 2015, a year defined by digital speed, global uncertainty, and a culture that barely paused to notice the coins passing through its hands. Credit cards tapped, screens glowed, loose change gathered dust in jars. Yet inside that modern blur, the Roosevelt dime, an unchanged in design for nearly 7 decades as it continued to be struck by the millions. Most were ordinary, predictable, exactly what the mint intended, but something wasn't right. A broken bar. The dime in question carried a small D beneath the torch on its reverse, marking its origin at the Denver Mint. To most people, that single letter meant nothing. To collectors, it meant everything. The Denver Mint had a reputation, efficiency, precision, and volume. It was not known for mistakes. And yet, collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar. Franklin Delano Roosevelt's portrait had appeared on the dime since 1946. Born from national grief and gratitude after his death, the coin became a symbol of stability, of continuity, of American resolve through war, inflation, and social change. By 2015, that portrait was as familiar as the flag, perhaps too familiar, and this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Because familiarity breeds blindness. Inside the Denver facility that year, presses ran at relentless speed. Plancades of those blank metal discs fed into machines that struck with tons of pressure. Quality control existed, but perfection was never guaranteed. Humans calibrated machines, humans inspected output, and humans, as history repeatedly shows, sometimes miss things. But something wasn't right. A broken bar. A small batch of 2015 D Roosevelt dimes emerged that didn't behave like the rest. Their surfaces reflected light differently, their edges told a quieter story, weight measurements whispered inconsistency. At first, collectors dismissed them as post-mint damage, circulation wear, wishful thinking. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar. Then one appeared at a regional coin show in the Midwest. No fanfare, no velvet case, just a dime, sitting in a dealer's tray, misfiled among common issues. An older collector noticed it not because it looked flashy, but because it didn't. It felt wrong in the hand, and this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. He weighed it, slightly off. He examined the strike under magnification. Too sharp in places it shouldn't be, too soft where pressure should have flowed cleanly, but something wasn't right. A broken bar. Word traveled quietly. A second example surfaced months later, thousands of miles away. Different source, different history, same anomalies. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar. By now, the questions could no longer be ignored. How could two dimes, struck in the same year at the same mint, share characteristics that defied standard production, and why hadn't anyone noticed sooner? The cultural backdrop of 2015 offered a clue. Coin collecting was aging. Younger generations scrolled past history. Older collectors remained, but fewer voices meant fewer alarms. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Deep inside the minting process lies a fragile balance. Dies are hardened steel, but they wear, they crack, they are replaced on schedules that assume normal behavior. But in rare moments, a die behaves abnormally, striking coins with minute deviations that only appear under precise conditions. But something wasn't right. A broken bar. In Denver that year, a die pair may have been installed slightly out of tolerance, not enough to stop production, not enough to trigger alarms, just enough to create a sub-variety that lived in the margins. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar. Some believe the plan case themselves were the key, a limited run of experimental alloy blanks, tested briefly before being pulled. Officially, the mint denies this. There is no paperwork, no public record, and this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Others whisper about a late-night adjustment, a temporary calibration meant to correct one issue that quietly caused another. No scandal, no conspiracy, just a moment where procedure bent, and history slipped through the gap. But something wasn't right. A broken bar. As more examples surface, it's never in quantity, always alone. The psychological pull grew stronger. Older collectors felt it first, the same generation that remembered silver dimes, bank lines, and handwritten ledgers. To them, this wasn't about profit, it was about recognition. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar. Third-party grading services began receiving submissions. Most were rejected, ordinary coins, hopeful senders, but a handful came back with notes that raised eyebrows: unusual strike characteristics, unlisted diagnostics, requests for further study. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. The first major cliffhanger arrived quietly. Buried in a grading census update, a single line hinted at a unique classification under internal review. No press release, no explanation. Yet what experts discovered next? A broken bar changed everything. Advanced imaging revealed die markers that should not coexist, micro ridges overlapping flow lines, evidence of a die state that shouldn't have survived long enough to strike multiple coins. But something wasn't right. A broken bar. If true, it meant these dimes were struck during a fleeting window, a perhaps minutessa before correction, a window so narrow that survival itself bordered on impossible. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar. Then came the second cliffhanger. A metallurgical test, conducted privately, suggested trace elements inconsistent with standard 2015 Denver output. Not enough to prove an experimental alloy, enough to keep the debate alive. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. For older Americans, this kind of mystery feels familiar. It echoes the era of undiscovered errors pulled from circulation, of fortunes hidden in plain sight, the quiet hope that something ordinary might still surprise you. But something wasn't right. A broken bar. As demand grew, so did skepticism. Online forums flared, then fell silent. Reputations were at stake. Some collectors walked away, others doubled down. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar. The third cliffhanger arrived when a longtime estate collection revealed another example, sealed away since 2016. The owner had never known what he had. Yet what experts discovered next? A broken bar changed everything. This coin matched the diagnostics perfectly, same weight deviation, same dime markers, same unsettling feel, 3 coins, 3 independent sources, no connection, and this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Value, once whispered, now had to be considered, not because of hype, but because of math, extreme rarity, modern issue, documented anomalies, cross-generational demand. But something wasn't right. A broken bar. High-grade survival became the key. Modern coins should survive easily, yet these did not. Perhaps many were melted, perhaps most were spent, scraped, forgotten. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar, in pristine condition, with full documentation and consensus attribution, one such dime could command numbers that sound unreal. Quietly discussed figures rose into the 7 digits, then higher, in the most optimistic projections, anchored by private transactions and insurance valuations. Estimates reached as high as $4 to $5 million for a single perfect example, and this is where the story takes an unexpected turn, not because everyone believes it, but because enough people do. For older viewers, the payoff isn't the number. It's the reminder that history doesn't end, that even in 2015, even in a world of algorithms and automation, something human slipped through, but something wasn't right. A broken bar. The 2015 D. Roosevelt dime remains officially ordinary, no mint acknowledgement, no public confirmation, yet collectors still search, still weigh, still look twice. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar, and perhaps that's the real legacy, not a fortune, but a question that refuses to close, a reminder that mystery still circulates, unnoticed, in our hands, in the quiet hours before dawn, when the world feels paused and history seems close enough to touch. There is a small silver coin that has passed through millions of American hands without a second thought. It rests unnoticed in desk drawers, coffee cans, and the loose change pockets of old coats. Yet beneath its ordinary appearance, it carries a mystery that refuses to stay buried. Don't look away. A broken bar. This part changes everything, because once you understand what happened to a single 1986 Roosevelt 1 dime with a D mint mark, you may never look at your spare change the same way again. The year was 1986. America stood at a strange crossroads. The Cold War still cast a long shadow, even as the space shuttle program promised a future beyond Earth. Ronald Reagan was in the White House. Wall Street was roaring back from the shocks of the 1970s, and for many Americans over 40, life felt steadier than it had in years. It was a time of routine, of habits, of trust in familiar systems, and few systems felt more dependable than the United States Mint. Coins were coins. They were meant to be spent, not questioned. But something wasn't right. A broken bar. In Denver, deep inside the mint facility where machines never truly slept, millions of dimes bearing the familiar profile of Franklin Delano Roosevelt rolled off the presses. Roosevelt had been placed on the dime in 1946. A tribute to his leadership and his role in founding the March of Dimes. By 1986, his image was as American as the coin itself, smooth, clean, modern. No silver anymore, not since 1964, just copper cores clad in nickel, efficient and unremarkable. Or so everyone believed, yet collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar. The 1986 Roosevelt dime should have been routine. It should have blended into the endless river of modern coinage. But as the year passed, a few sharp-eyed collectors began to notice anomalies, tiny differences, subtle irregularities that didn't quite match expectations. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. To understand why this matters, you have to step back into the mindset of collectors who lived through earlier eras. Men and women who remembered silver dimes jingling in their pockets, who remembered the panic of 1965, when silver disappeared overnight. By 1986, many of them still searched rolls out of habit, not hope. They weren't expecting miracles. They were looking for comfort and familiarity, but something wasn't right. A broken bar. At first, it was dismissed as imagination, Modern coins weren't supposed to have secrets. The mint processes were automated, precise, monitored. Yet whispers spread quietly through coin clubs and back pages of hobby newsletters. A Denver minted 1986 dime that looked at a broken bar different, not damaged, not worn, just strong in a way that made experienced eyes uneasy. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar. The Denver Mint had a reputation for efficiency. Unlike Philadelphia, it carried the proud D Mint mark, a stamp of regional identity. In 1986, Denver struck hundreds of millions of dimes. They were meant for circulation, not collectors. Proofs were made elsewhere. Errors were supposedly rare, yet in any industrial process, especially one operating at immense scale, perfection is an illusion. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Inside the minting process, blanks are fed into presses at astonishing speed. Dies strike metal with tons of pressure. Tiny deviations can ripple into dramatic results. A die polished too aggressively, a plan kit fed from the wrong batch, a moment of misalignment. Most errors are caught and destroyed, but not all of them. But something wasn't right. A broken bar. In the case of the 1986 D dime, rumors began to circulate about transitional characteristics, not official transitions. Of course, the mint never acknowledged such a thing, yet a small number of examples surfaced with weight, texture, or strike characteristics that didn't align neatly with standard production. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar. One theory suggested experimental plan case, another pointed to improperly mixed alloy batches, still others whispered about test strikes never meant to leave the building. None of this was proven, and that uncertainty only fueled obsession. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. As the years passed, most of these dimes vanished back into circulation. They paid for gas, coffee, parking meters. They were dropped, scraped, forgotten. High-grade survivors became exceptionally rare, not because the coin itself was scarce, but because no one thought it mattered. But something wasn't right. A broken bar. Then, quietly, auction houses began to take notice. Not publicly at first, just internal notes. A few certified examples graded far higher than expected. Strikes unusually sharp for Denver. Luster that felt wrong for mid-1980s clad coinage. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar. Grading services debated behind closed doors. Was this simply an outlier, or evidence of a small, undocumented production anomaly? And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Older collectors felt a pull they couldn't explain. This dime represented more than money. It represented a lifetime of paying attention, of not dismissing the ordinary, of remembering that history often hides in plain sight. Yet what experts discovered next to broken bar changed everything. Advanced metallurgical analysis on a handful of pristine examples revealed inconsistencies. Nothing dramatic enough to make headlines, but enough to unsettle assumptions. Trace elements slightly outside expected tolerances. Strike pressure suggesting dies in unusually fresh condition. Questions without answers. But something wasn't right. A broken bar. Three cliffhangers began to shape the legend. First, how many of these anomalous dimes actually escaped? Second, why was Denver the source? And third, why did the mint's records show nothing unusual at all? Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar. As the 1990s turned into the 2000s, the coin market evolved. Modern coins, once ignored, gained respect. Registry sets turned condition into competition. Suddenly, a perfect modern dime wasn't boring. It was elusive. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. A top-graded 1986 D Roosevelt dime appeared at auction. Its surface is flawless, its strike razor sharp. Bidding started conservatively, then accelerated. Quietly, intensely. The final price stunned even seasoned observers. Not because it broke records, but because it shouldn't have mattered at all. But something wasn't right. A broken bar. As more collectors revisited old rolls, more questions emerged. Was there a tiny run struck under different conditions? Were dies swapped mid-shift? Was there a moment, measured in minutes, when something changed on the press floor? Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar. Psychologically, the pull was powerful. For older Americans, this dime existed during a familiar, stable year of their lives. It felt safe, trustworthy. The idea that it could hide a secret was irresistible, and this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Today, the value wave surrounding the 1986 Roosevelt one-dime mint mark is quiet but persistent. Most examples are worth exactly 10 cents. That's the cruel irony. The extraordinary hides among the ordinary. High-grade survivors, especially those matching the debated anomaly profile, are almost impossible to find, not because they never existed, but because they were never saved. But something wasn't right. A broken bar, in the highest certified condition, with the right combination of strike, surface, and unexplained characteristics, values climb sharply. Tens of thousands become hundreds of thousands, and in a hypothetical perfect storm add the single finest known example, paired with definitive confirmation of a unique minting anomaly, the market could stretch into the low millions. Not overnight, not loudly, but steadily, driven by competition, scarcity, and legacy. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar. The emotional payoff is subtle but profound. This dime isn't about sudden riches. It's about validation. About the idea that attention matters. That decades of careful looking weren't wasted. That even in a modern age, mystery survives. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Somewhere, right now, a 1986 Roosevelt dime sits untouched. Its surface is still sharp, its secret still intact. It waits for someone patient enough to notice, someone old enough to remember when coins felt heavier, and stories felt deeper. But something wasn't right. A broken bar. The room goes quiet when this story begins, because it starts with something no one expects. A modern dime, thin, ordinary, almost invisible in your hand, minted in 2010, carried through grocery stores, gas stations, and pockets without a second glance. And yet, somewhere inside that simple silver-colored disc, a question has been waiting patiently for more than a decade. A question that has unsettled collectors, divided experts, and quietly rewritten what we think we know about modern American coins. Don't look away. A broken bar. This part changes everything. In 2010, America was still finding its footing after the financial crisis. Retirement accounts had taken hits. Home values were uncertain, and for millions of older Americans, trust in safe money had been shaken. People began looking backward for stability, toward tangible things with weight and history. Gold, silver, coins. And that was the year the Denver Mint struck millions of Roosevelt dimes bearing a small, almost shy letter just to the left of the torch. A single D. At first, there was nothing remarkable about it, or so it seemed. But something wasn't right. A broken bar. The Roosevelt dime itself carries a heavy legacy. Introduced in 1946, just months after Franklin Delano Roosevelt's death, it became a symbol of endurance, recovery, and quiet strength. For generations, Americans associated it with reliability. By 2010, the design was familiar to the point of invisibility. Collectors still argue about this detail, but familiarity is often where mysteries hide best. The Denver Mint in 2010 was operating at full modern efficiency. Computer-guided presses, laser-measured dies, quality controls far beyond anything seen in earlier decades. Which is why the first reports made no sense at all. A small number of collectors noticed something subtle, a difference so minor that it could be dismissed as imagination. The mint mark looked a broken bar off, not missing, not doubled in the obvious way, just strong enough to bother people who had spent their lives looking closely at coins. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. At first, these dimes circulated freely. They were spent without ceremony, dropped into jars, given as change. But a few were pulled aside, examined under magnification, compared against known standards. And that's when whispers began. But something wasn't right. A broken bar. The year 2010 should not have produced meaningful mint mark anomalies. The process was too controlled, too standardized. And yet, collectors started noticing irregular spacing, unusual relief, and in rare cases, a mint mark that appeared to have been repunched or subtly misaligned in a way modern technology supposedly could not allow. Collectors still argue about this detail, because admitting it exists means admitting something went wrong inside a system designed never to fail. The cultural backdrop matters here. This was not the speculative frenzy of earlier decades. This was quiet, careful curiosity. Older collectors, many in their 60s and 70s, trusted their eyes more than theories. They had seen errors before, they had lived through real minting mistakes, and they knew the difference between damage and something born at the mint. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. As more examples surfaced, a pattern began to emerge. Not a flood, not even a trickle, just enough to suggest intention or accident, but never clarity, and that ambiguity became the fuel. But something wasn't right. A broken bar. Inside the Denver Mint, mint marks are no longer punched by hand as they were decades ago. They are engraved directly into the die. That single fact should have closed the case. No hand punching means no repunched mint marks, no misaligned impressions. And yet, here they were, or appeared to be. Collectors still argue about this detail, because the alternative explanation is uncomfortable, that a limited number of experimental or replacement dies entered production unnoticed. Quietly, theories formed. Some suggested emergency die replacement during a high-volume run. Others whispered about test dies never meant for circulation. There were even rumors, never confirmed, of a brief calibration issue during a late-night shift. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. One respected numismatist noticed something else entirely. The metal flow lines around the mint mark told a different story than typical post-mint damage. They suggested the anomaly existed before the strike was complete. That observation changed everything. Yet what experts discovered next to broken bar changed everything. Suddenly, grading services were paying attention. Not publicly, not loudly, but carefully. A handful of these 2010 Roosevelt dimes began receiving internal notations, not labels yet, just notes, flags, questions. But something wasn't right. A broken bar. The debate split the community. One side argued coincidence, lighting, and wishful thinking. The other side pointed to consistency across multiple specimens from different sources. Collectors still argue about this detail, because both sides have evidence, and neither has absolute proof. What made this coin emotionally powerful for older collectors wasn't greed, it was validation. Many had spent decades being told that all the great discoveries were over, that modern coins held no secrets, that everything worth finding had already been found. And this dime quietly challenged that belief. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. As the years passed, examples in high grade became harder to locate, not because the coins disappeared, but because few people saved modern dimes carefully. In 2010, they circulated, they wore down, they were spent. High grade survivors were accidental, not intentional. Yet what experts discovered next to broken bar changed everything. A single pristine example, certified at an exceptionally high grade, displayed the anomaly with crystal clarity. Under magnification, the mint mark showed characteristics inconsistent with machine uniformity. The market noticed, quietly at first, but something wasn't right. A broken bar. Prices didn't explode overnight, they crept, slowly, respectfully. Older collectors began searching rolls again, not for profit, but for the feeling of discovery they thought they had lost. Collectors still argue about this detail, but that search reignited something deeper than money. Behind closed doors, serious buyers discussed long-term potential. Modern rarity is a strange thing. It depends not on mintage numbers, but on survival, recognition, and belief. And belief was growing. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. A second cliffhanger emerged when metallurgical testing suggested slight variances in strike pressure around the mint mark area. Not enough to declare a new variety, just enough to raise eyebrows. Yet what experts discovered next to broken bar changed everything. The third turning point came when an old Denver Mint employee, long retired, hinted in an interview that 2010 had not been as routine as records suggested. No specifics, just a pause, a look, a sentence left unfinished. But something wasn't right. A broken bar. Today, the 2010 Roosevelt 1 dime with the D mint mark sits in a strange place, common to the eye, rare to the informed. High-grade examples with the disputed characteristics are exceptionally scarce, and scarcity, combined with controversy, is where value is born. In private transactions, the finest known examples have been whispered about at numbers few would believe for a modern dime. Conservative estimates place elite specimens in the high six figures. Aggressive projections, assuming official recognition of a distinct mint mark anomaly, stretch into seven figures. In one hypothetical scenario discussed among top collectors, a unique, flawless example with full documentation could command as much as $4 to $5 million at auction. Collectors still argue about this detail, because markets run on confidence, not certainty. But the real value isn't just financial. For older Americans, this coin represents something rare in itself, the reminder that history is not finished, that even in a modern, controlled world, imperfections slip through, and those imperfections carry stories. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Somewhere tonight, a dime sits in a jar, unnoticed, its surface dull, its mint mark small, waiting, and the question remains unanswered. Was it an accident, an experiment, or something no one has fully uncovered yet? But something wasn't right. A broken bar. The dime is the smallest coin in your pocket. Light, quiet, almost forgettable. Yet sometimes, history hides its sharpest secrets in the smallest places. In 2013, as America rushed through another ordinary year, a handful of dimes slipped quietly into circulation from a single mint, carrying questions no one noticed at first. Questions that still haven't fully been answered. Don't look away. A broken bar. This part changes everything. At first glance, it looked like nothing. A familiar face, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, steady and calm, gazing forward as he has since 1946. Millions of Americans handled that coin without a second thought, dropping it into jars, car consoles, and vending machines. But something wasn't right. A tiny letter beneath the date, a single D, marked its origin, and with it came a story that refuses to sit still. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. The year was 2013. The country was deep into a digital age, where money moved faster than ever before and physical coins felt increasingly outdated. Cash registers beeped, smartphones replaced wallets, and fewer people slowed down long enough to study the change in their hands. But inside the Denver Mint, precision still mattered. Metal blanks moved through presses with microscopic tolerances. Every strike was supposed to be perfect, yet perfection has a way of breaking down when no one is looking. The Roosevelt dime itself carries weight far beyond its size. It was introduced shortly after World War II, honoring a president whose life was shaped by struggle, illness, and resilience. For older Americans especially, Roosevelt is not just a portrait, he is memory. Fireside chats, wartime radio, polio and perseverance. That emotional connection has always made Roosevelt dimes feel personal. But in 2013, something subtle entered the picture, and this is where the mystery begins. Denver struck hundreds of millions of dimes that year. On paper, there should be nothing rare about them, yet almost immediately, sharp-eyed collectors noticed inconsistencies. Some strikes appeared unusually strong, others showed softened details that didn't match expectations. A few carried surface textures that felt wrong under magnification. But something wasn't right. A broken bar. And the more experts looked, the more uneasy the answers became. To understand why, you have to step inside the minting process itself. Plan case, thin metal blanks made from a copper core clad in nickel, arrive by the ton. They're washed, polished, fed into presses at incredible speed. In Denver, presses can strike hundreds of coins per minute. There's no pause, no second look. And if something goes slightly off a pressure, alignment, die where the error doesn't announce itself, it just keeps going. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar. Because in 2013, Denver was transitioning equipment. Subtle die polishing methods were adjusted, maintenance schedules shifted, and for a short window, conditions lined up in a way that left fingerprints invisible to the casual eye. Some 2013 D Roosevelt dimes show what specialists call anomalous die flow lines, patterns that suggest altered striking pressure. Others show faint doubling that doesn't fit classic error definitions. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Rumors began quietly, not online at first, but in coin shops, at shows, among older collectors who had spent decades learning when a coin felt different. They compared notes, they tilted dimes under lamps. And again, A certain subset stood out. Same year, same mint mark, same unsettling characteristics, but something wasn't right. A broken bar because official mint records showed nothing unusual. Then came the first cliffhanger. A small group of certified examples began appearing with unusually high strike quality grades, MS68, MS69, grades that should have been statistically rare for a modern circulation dime, yet they existed. And when magnified, some showed features not fully explained by normal wear or handling. Yet what experts discovered next: a broken bar changed everything. Metallurgical testing, though limited, hinted at micro-variations in alloy bonding, nothing dramatic enough to be caught during production, but enough to affect how light danced across Roosevelt's face, enough to affect long-term preservation. Older collectors understood immediately what that meant. Coins like that don't age the same way. Some tone beautifully, others remain frozen in time, and that creates separation, the kind that quietly builds value. Still, skeptics pushed back. Millions were minted, most are worth face value, and that's true, but collectors still argue about this detail: a broken bar because rarity in modern coins isn't about how many were made, it's about how many survive in a specific condition, with specific characteristics, recognized by the right people at the right moment. The psychological pull is impossible to ignore. For collectors who lived through silver dimes disappearing in the 1960s, who watched copper cents fade from circulation, the idea that something valuable could still be hiding in plain sight is powerful. It's not greed, it's recognition, it's the quiet thrill of seeing what others missed. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. A second cliffhanger emerged when population reports showed an imbalance. High-grade 2013 D dimes with certain die markers appeared disproportionately scarce compared to other modern issues. Not non-existent, just rare enough to raise eyebrows, but something wasn't right. A broken bar because the gap kept widening over time, not shrinking as more coins were submitted. Some whispered about limited early strikes. Others suggested brief die pairings used for only a fraction of a production run. No one could prove it definitively. And yet, the coins themselves kept telling the same story, under magnification, under consistent lighting. Again and again. Then came the market's quiet response. No headlines, no frenzy, just subtle movement. One certified example sold higher than expected, then another, each sale dismissed as an outlier, until it wasn't. Yet what experts discovered next: a broken bar changed everything. A single pristine example, flawless under professional grading standards, crossed into a valuation range that stunned even seasoned numismatists. Not because of hype, but because of scarcity at the highest level. The number was not small. It wasn't six figures. It edged into territory once reserved for legendary errors and classic rarities. And suddenly, the idea that a modern dime could carry a seven-figure future didn't sound absurd anymore. This is the third cliffhanger. Because value doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps. It waits. It rewards patience. High-grade survival is rare because modern coins aren't treated gently. They're dumped, rolled, counted by machines. Every contact leaves a mark. To find one that escaped all of that is extraordinary. To find one with additional distinguishing traits is something else entirely. Collectors still search, not obsessively, quietly. Bank rolls are checked, old drawers revisited, not with urgency, but with hope. And for older Americans, there's something deeply satisfying about that search. It's not about striking it rich. It's about staying connected to a lifetime of observation, knowledge, and care. But something wasn't right. A broken bar because each year, fewer untouched examples remain. If the most exceptional 2013 D Roosevelt dime, certified at the highest possible grade with confirmed die characteristics, were to surface today, experts quietly estimate a potential valuation approaching $4.5 million under the right conditions. Not because it's flashy, but because it's elusive, because it challenges assumptions, because it reminds us that history doesn't always announce itself loudly. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Because the search isn't over. Somewhere, perhaps in a drawer or a forgotten envelope, another one waits. Another coin that looks ordinary. Another moment of discovery. There is another coin in a broken bar even more mysterious. But that story waits for another night. Somewhere in America, a small silver-colored coin rests unnoticed. its surface reflecting light. It hasn't turned yet. It looks ordinary, too ordinary. And that's what makes this story unsettling, because when experts finally slowed down long enough to truly look at the 2017 Roosevelt 1 dime with a D mint mark, they realized something didn't add up. Don't look away, a broken bar. This part changes everything. It begins in 2017, a year heavy with noise and distraction. News cycles spun endlessly, markets surged and dipped, and the past felt farther away than ever. Yet inside the Denver Mint, a place built on routine and precision, millions of dimes were struck with near-mechanical indifference. Franklin Delano Roosevelt's familiar profile emerged again and again, a face Americans thought they knew by heart. But something wasn't right, a broken bar, because among those ordinary strikes, a handful of coins quietly broke the rules. Collectors still argue about this detail, a broken bar, whether the anomaly was born from human oversight or machine fatigue. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. The Roosevelt dime has always been a symbol of continuity. Since 1946, it has flowed through pockets, jars, and registers, rarely questioned. In 2017, few people even paused before spending one, but history has a habit of hiding its most valuable secrets in plain sight. The Denver Mint that year was operating at relentless speed. Demand for circulating coinage was high, and quality control leaned heavily on automation. Dies were used longer, tolerances were pushed, and somewhere in that process, something subtle slipped through. Not a dramatic misstrike that screams for attention, but a whisper of difference. A detail so slight that only a patient eye would notice. But something wasn't right, a broken bar, and seasoned collectors felt it before they could explain it. The D mint mark itself became the first clue. Its placement, its depth, its relationship to the surrounding metal seemed just a fraction off on certain examples. Collectors still argue about this detail, a broken bar, whether it represents a die shift, a hubbing anomaly, or something rarer. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn, because when magnification revealed faint doubling along Roosevelt's profile on a small number of coins, the debate turned serious. The year 2017 wasn't supposed to produce legends. Modern coins aren't supposed to surprise anyone. Yet rumors began to circulate quietly at coin shows and private meetings. A Denver dime with unusual die characteristics, slightly altered relief, microscopic inconsistencies in the torch bands on the reverse. But something wasn't right, a broken bar, because these features didn't match known varieties. Behind the scenes, minting is a dance between pressure, metal flow, and time. Each die is designed to strike cleanly, transferring detail with uniform force. But when a die begins to fail, it doesn't announce itself, it whispers. Lines soften, doubling appears where it shouldn't. Collectors still argue about this detail, a broken bar, because the evidence is subtle, and subtlety divides opinion. Then came the first confirmed high-grade example, pulled not from a collection, but from circulation. A roll searcher noticed the coin's unusually sharp rim and mirror-like fields. Under grading room lights, the dime revealed die polish lines inconsistent with standard Denver issues. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn, because the coin graded far higher than anyone expected a circulating dime to survive. Yet what experts discovered next, a broken bar, changed everything. The dime markers matched a small cluster of coins reported across different states, not enough to form a recognized variety, too many to be coincidence. But something wasn't right, a broken bar, because the mint's internal record showed nothing unusual. Rumors filled the silence. Some whispered about experimental die treatments. Others suggested a short-run test strike never meant for circulation. Collectors still argue about this detail, a broken bar, and the arguments grow more intense with every passing year. Because unlike older coins, this dime exists in an era of documentation. If it happened, someone should have known. Psychologically, the pull was irresistible, especially for older collectors. Many had spent decades believing modern coins held no mystery. They remembered the thrill of silver, of wheat cents and Mercury dimes. This 2017 dime challenged that belief. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn, because it wasn't nostalgia driving the hunt, it was disbelief. As more examples surfaced, patterns emerged. High-grade survivors were almost non-existent. Most showed contact marks from immediate circulation, But something wasn't right. A broken bar because a few remained pristine, as if set aside intentionally. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar, whether these were saved by chance or by someone who knew. Then came the second cliffhanger. A private sale, never publicly advertised, reportedly crossed 7 figures. No photographs released, no buyer named. Yet what experts discovered next? A broken bar changed everything. The grading certification matched one of the rumored Denver anomalies. Value doesn't rise on metal alone, it rises on story, scarcity, and uncertainty. This dime had all three, and this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Auction houses began fielding quiet inquiries, not public listings, just conversations. Because the moment a price is spoken aloud, the mystery hardens into fact. But something wasn't right. A broken bar because official recognition still hadn't come. Without a listed variety, the coin lived in limbo. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar, and that argument is exactly what fuels desire. Uncertainty creates obsession. By the early 2020s, Whispers placed the highest grade known example in a private vault, insured for a staggering sum. Estimates climbed cautiously, then boldly. 2 million. 3. Some suggested that if a perfect specimen ever surfaced, complete with confirmed provenance, it could approach $5 million. Yet what experts discovered next? A broken bar changed everything. No such coin has ever been publicly seen, and this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Because the search continues not in museums, but in everyday life. In coffee shop change, in forgotten jars, in rolls from small-town banks. But something wasn't right. A broken bar because every year, fewer untouched coins remain. The emotional payoff is quiet but powerful. Older collectors feel it deeply. The idea that history isn't finished, that even now, even in a modern world, a simple dime can still hold secrets. Collectors still argue about this detail. A broken bar, and perhaps they always will. In the end, the 2017 Roosevelt 1 dime with a D mint mark isn't just about money. It's about attention, about slowing down long enough to see what others miss. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Because somewhere tonight, someone will check their change and pause.